captive volume for many, many years. Now, in that domain, people can design a one-size-fits-all operating system, as well as one-size-fits-all microprocessor. Which is why, if you look at it, in the early days of Taiwan, we have microprocessor, we have I/O chips, we have graphics chips, then we have chipset. So the whole Taiwan PC industry was emerged by supporting not the microprocessor, but everything outside of the microprocessor. Because there's 200 volume, captive volume, Intel was able to integrate everything within that microprocessor space. Therefore, we suffer as the Taiwan OEM, ODM. But the Chinese believe that, the circle of life goes around. Are we at a point the microprocessor becomes so more advanced and so expensive? Having a giant, a bigger, faster microprocessor and a bigger one-size-fits-all operating system is no longer valid. In the consumer domain, my daughter, for example, from day one, my daughter was not doing content creation. When I got my first PC, it happens to be a Macintosh, right? The Apple IIe. I was using that to write my own code to do the data acquisition. And then I switched to IBM PC, and I was learning how to do the word processor, doing the programming. So our generation grew up using the PC as a workhorse to do content creation. My daughter grew up using the electronic gadgets as a content reception. They never used any device for content creation. It's quite amazing, when I go to have dinner with my daughter using her iPhone, take picture of every single course. Immediately, I don't know how they did it. They sent it to 40 of her friends. And then 40 of her friends simultaneously sent whatever they're eating at a time back to the other 40. But think about the content, think about the bandwidth that is required.
That's not Moore's law, that's Menu's law.
Exactly. So what I'm saying is the consumer behavior creates Apple. The consumer behavior creates the bandwidth requirement. Because the user that uses the content creation, like us, who loves PC, loves more power, that generation has already peaked out, saturated. That's why PC, the party is not over. It's just a different party, different DJ.
But one could also argue that, sure, consumer creates what the designer should build, but you can also say, no, there are now so many different designs coming up, and luck of the draw, consumers pick the winner, and there you go. Winner takes all.
So a lot of credit to Apple, because I think Apple was the company that figures out this consumer migration. This might not be by design, because I remember the Apple product, I'm kind of a...
They did the Newton in the 90s, right?
Right. They figure out but they create a 7% to 10% user base, which is more cult, more music, more graphics oriented, more filmmaker, it's more artistic. They never quite capture the academic people. They never quite capture the professional that are doing the word processor and the PowerPoint.
But it seems to me that the breakthrough for Apple was actually much earlier. It was the iPod, where you could get the music, and the key, interestingly enough, the most difficult breakthrough in that was to make music 99 cents. Because suddenly it became a complete food chain. Technically it was possible. Financially you could execute, and lo and behold, the content owners agreed. Everything else has been somewhat following that model.
I have a very simple question that I asked many people, and people couldn't answer. If you remember, there was one gadget that everybody uses. It's called Palm Pilot. Palm Pilot was so popular at the time, and the stock price pumped up to $110, I remember, because it's a dedicated, segmented application just for address keeping. And everybody has one. And later on, Palm Pilot started evolving. They're trying to do the other things.
And they split it out of the company, I believe. Huh?
Right, but it didn't make it. iPod, when I first got it, I asked the question, what is so unique about iPod? I think what is so unique about iPod is very easy to use. This is the first one, the capacitance, the touch sensor. That was the beginning. Self-contained. It doesn't have the Sony, the Toshiba type of I/O devices in traditional way. Everything using network. So they make a system that looks very fashionable, segmented, dedicated. But the real winner was Steve Jobs was capable of negotiating to the content provider in a very sleek way and block. So if you look at the iPhone, where does iPhone make the biggest money other than the flash memory? They control the content. They control the content, the gateway, they block the music, they block the Hollywood, the digital content. So in my view, what Apple is going to transcend to is not going to be a hardware company. And we miss this, because hardware is not going to make money when it becomes commoditized. Like a PC, it's already post-commodity. So it's going to be the content gateway. Whoever controls the service or the content is going to make that money.
So all you need to do at ASE is put a little bit of a check on your package that only that you can charge for the content. You're at the wrong place, right? I mean, per your description.
I mean, it's really controversial because a lot of investors ask me about how do I see ASE long term. If I want to give you a very careful, cautious, because we do have people here, they're all my customers.
Just tell me in private.
Okay. You think about the new paradigm. The new paradigm says that it is going to be very expensive to create something mega. So that is a dead end. And very few people can afford it. Very few fab can do it. Now, semiconductor, on the other hand, is only 0.5% of the global GDP. I checked the years. I'm 54. Semiconductor is 55, 1 year older than I am. James Bond, 50. So semiconductor is only 4 to 5 years older than James Bond. You call 0.5% GDP to be end of the semiconductor? I don't believe so. Then the question is, what is next? So from ASE's perspective, if we cannot make the all-powerful operating system, if we cannot afford to make all-powerful microprocessor, we, industry collectively, needs to come up with a basic processor, whether it's ARM-based or some other based. One basic operating system. And we're going to go back to the circle of live thinking. The I/O chips, the old graphic chip, the old chipset will start coming in. Which means that the SoC has come to a physical cliff. It becomes basically economically non-viable. Therefore, we talk about the SIP, talk about interposer, we talk about whatever you want to do. But in my view, the future generation architecture is going to be a disintegrated, heterogeneous. It's not going to be the monogamous like the Intel, because the 200 million, 300 million cost, volume, captive, long cycle time no longer exist. When that paradigm breaks, people need to embrace it. That applies to all of the Taiwan PC industry. So they say Taiwan PC industry is dead. And for the world, I couldn't understand, what do you mean by death? Equipment can be transferred, designer can be transferred, the flexibility can be transferred. Our issue is not to lament by the giant, the emergence of the giant. You got to go back to the last 50 years of history. Every 10 years, new wave emerge, new paradigm, new governing equation. Our job is to deploy this ahead of time. I think that's what the opinion leader is all about.
But it's well possible that in that scenario, what you have is a few giants emerging for a decade or more, while meanwhile a next generation set of smaller companies come up. And certainly if you look at the consolidations that we've seen, in just the last few years, they certainly point to the notion of critical mass, be it in manufacturing, be it in design.
That's precisely what we're talking about, the long tail. Because if you look at IBM market share, IBM is 97% of the mainframe. Nobody talk about, well, what about IBM, consolidating the mainframe? 97%. Intel is by far, they're not even 97%. And by the way, has anyone concerned about Intel and Microsoft in the last 10 years? We were concerned about 15 years ago. Nobody talk about Intel and Microsoft. Because when the segment is already mature, when that governing equation has already been captured by the giant, they will ride it all the way to the end. IBM is still alive and well. Boeing is still alive and well. I'm not saying they're a bad company. I'm just saying that for that particular paradigm, we already identified a giant. And the giant is going to be with us for another 40 years. Let's not be bothered by the giant.
In our field, 40 years is a long time, right?
I mean, hey, listen, in our lifetime, in James Bond's lifetime, we have seen 5 waves. We have seen the aerospace. We have seen the mainframe. We have seen the analog phone. We have seen the PC, we have seen the digital phone, and now we're seeing the internet. cloud computing.
But not each one of those ways have been dominated by a single player or very few players.
The way it should be. Automotive was dominating in Japan, in US, by a few players.
So let's transition a little bit from the market dominance to the technical abilities, because no matter what, even if you are a big leader or if you're a small upcomer, the amount of technology that you have to absorb and bring to life is quite considerable.
Right.
And so in that context, maybe starting with your field, anything new in your field, or is just still a box with some pins?
You know, you really have a bifurcated business model, because now our bread and butter has to come from long tail. So, you know, I don't think anybody is more cordial or courteous to Apple or Samsung than I do.
Oh, you're polite too.
I'm very, very polite. I'm very, very careful. As a matter of fact, I can't even pronounce Apple. I normally just say Cupertino Company. You know, that's how polite. Because in the Chinese way, you can never pronounce emperor's last name, right? So I'm not sure you get it, but probably she got it. So I'm very, very cordial to them, because the long tail defines, I don't know the percentage, maybe 90% of the volume in the P&L that we do. But the long tail giant also provides you the instrument of margin, cash flow. You can do the R&D, you can do the CapEx. Yeah. Therefore, you can lower the average cost of doing parts by infrastructure, by scale.
Now your R&D percentage is very small, right?
5%.
5%. And so at the same time, you see all this talk about 2D, 3D, 2.5D. How can you play, or to what extent does that migrate to others that can afford a higher percentage R&D spending?
I mean, I can answer this question by two ways. I mean, the ideal thinking is for TSMC to do it, because they have a lot of money. And TSMC, being the leader of the industry, you know, they ought to take the driver's seat. So a lot of people ask me, are you even concerned that TSMC wants to do your packaging? No, I have no concern at all. They're the leader. They're all powerful. They should show their responsibility to demonstrate the existing theorem of 3D. Once they demonstrate it, depending on the process and the economics associated with it, the industry will embrace it by defining the boundary condition of that baseline process.
Why don't you go the ASML route? You ask them to send you $500 million, a few more customers like that, and then you do 2.5D, 2.6D, 2.7D.
If they're willing to. But I believe that, you know, the TSMC came out saying that they want to define the baseline, which is really great news.
Sure. No, I appreciate that. Right. I'm hinting at the fact that simultaneously you see a change in model of the industry of collaboration. Right. In the case of ASML, where
I think the stake is slightly